When life throws you a curveball, how are you going to handle adversity? Welcome to the Fearless Mindset Podcast, where you're about to go on a journey as I interview security, business, and entertainment leaders on what it takes to stay fearless. I'm your host, Mark Ledlow, and enjoy today's episode. Hello, everyone. This is Mark Ledlow, the host of the Fearless Mindset Podcast, and just have a all-star guest. He's up and coming. Well, not really up and coming. He's been around. Mike Gips has been around for a long time. You see him all over LinkedIn. You see him on panels moderating in Chicago, in Vegas here soon. And we all want to know what the life is like with Mike Gips. I'm sure Deanna's like, okay, who's Mike? What's he up to? Well, first of all, he's got a law degree. He's a lawyer. And he's a subject matter expert in various things. I'll let him go into detail about that. But Mike, thanks for joining us. I know we talked about doing this at the Security Foundation there in OSAC, and we finally made it happen after a few months. I know you're busy. You're scheduled. You got a full schedule over there in the East Coast. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure to be on. To be with the fearless one, right? So happy to be here.
And also, I got to give a shout out. Is this your first published book?
It is. I've done chapters. I've done a lot of articles, papers, reports, but this is my first book.
So folks, if you haven't checked it out, I just went on Amazon, got it. It's like $20. And good, rich content about networking, the network of security in this book. Several industry colleagues were mentioned in this book. And Mike, thanks for the shout out for the Fearless Mindset Podcast. He actually put it in the top tier. I'm like, whoa, how did that happen? I wasn't expecting that. And I found out at the dinner, at OSAC dinner, TSF dinner in DC, that I was in there. I'm like, what? I looked at it like, holy smokes. I had no idea that we'd be even mentioned as a podcast, because there's millions of podcasts out there, folks. So I'm honored to be in it.
Well, I reached out to, as you said, I talked to, for that book, there's probably 150 security professionals who are represented. So it's their experiences, their wisdom, their comments. And for one of the sections, on podcasting, I asked people, what are the best podcasts out there for security and leadership? And yours came up, and multiple times, and I think there's a couple of quotes about the quality and how people value it. So it's the people have spoken. So it's not just my opinion; it's the larger security community, and pretty influential and knowledgeable people at that. So congratulations.
Well, thanks to your readers and your supporters and your followers and your industry colleagues. Basically, thanks to the security industry as a whole for that honor. I'm very humbled by that and didn't expect it, to be honest with you. And hard to believe that thing popped off 5 years in the middle of COVID, but hope it adds value to the industry. That's why I do. We don't have any sponsors at all. I just genuinely want to help that next generation be able to help find mentors and coaches through the podcast for different guests we have, like yourself and many, many others that we've had. And hope it's helpful, and we'll keep on going as long as there's a need. And congrats on your first publication. That's pretty cool.
Thank you. And the spirit that underlies the book is exactly what you articulated. I think there's no higher calling or no greater purpose to leadership than developing the next generation of professionals. You should be leaving a place, an organization, an environment, an industry better than you left it. And there's no better way than to help develop people who are going to push things further than you did. So, we're kindred spirits.
So, Mike, I got to ask you, when you're 21 years old, did you think you'd be where you're at right now?
Not at all. When I was 21 years old, I was graduating from college. I was a bit of a academic, so I did well in college. And I was pondering. I was a history and Spanish double major, and I was applying to two different things. One for a PhD in history, where I would be an academic, a professor, and a law degree. And I So I applied for both, a number of different institutions, and in some places I applied for both. Um, and in a couple of places I got into both schools, and I had to figure, it's 7 years for a PhD program, it's 3 years for a law degree, and what has more utility? Because I wasn't 100% sure I wanted to be a lawyer. Wasn't 100% sure I wanted to devote my life to academia. 7 years, doing a PhD. I mean, you could do it in less, but really it's not much less. And if I combine it with a law degree, I mean, you could do it. You could probably combine the two and do it in less than the total. But so I had to, so security wasn't even on my mind, except that when I was in my senior year in college, I was on the concert board of my college. And so what we did was we tried to get bands to play at my school. It was at Tufts University outside of Boston. And when bands came, one of my roles was I was a security guy. So I was a security officer, not armed, not trained, but I basically made sure fans didn't rush the stage. So I was at one of my first security assignments was doing security for the Violent Femmes. I don't know if you remember them from the 80s. They were like a punk band. And I wasn't stationed anywhere near the stage, though. I was like sort of in the upper deck, so I didn't have much to do except, make sure that the few people that were there didn't, do anything stupid, and they didn't. So I basically got paid, or not paid, but I volunteered to watch the show. So that was the extent of my security interest, was to support the conference board and to, get in to see shows of bands that I liked. So no, it wasn't even on the radar screen at all.
The audience is wondering what's keeping you busy now that you are with Kroll, and what is the clients out there needing from security experts? What is the security industry failing to do to the current clients out there? What are the clients needing that security is not providing for them these days?
Great question. And I think that there's so many threats out there and so much signal and noise, threats from cyber, from social media, from geopolitical disruption, from everything from ransomware to, executive protection risks, to polarization, people not agreeing on basic issues in the workplace, not be able to get along with each other, incivility, all those sorts of things, and AI making things more complicated, both for good and for bad, with deep fakes and things like that. People just are kind of at a loss of what to do. And we're seeing that, we specialize in certain fields, but we at Kroll, but we have a sort of a broad aperture on different industries and different size companies. But I'd say mid-sized companies that didn't have security programs, maybe just had IT or IT security do it, are now looking to have distinct physical security programs, or building physical security within an existing IT security organization. And ones with a little bit more, they may have facility managers that do security, or even have a security administrator, are starting to look at building actual whole security programs. And recently, I've had some clients come to me, more than one, who said, we want to know, we don't want to benchmark with our peers. We want to know what an ideal state is, like what best in class is, and tell us what that is from your experience and through kind of quasi benchmarking for organizations our size and our industry, and then tell us what the sort of the best state would be, and then we'll try to build towards that, if not at that level. But so that's a completely different mindset, where physical and cyber are being both contemplated at at a high detailed level, and that more than just, in the past, we'd see check the box compliance behavior. Now they're saying, what would it take us to be best in class? And I think we're at the beginning of that trend, because I've seen a few clients ask for that recently, and that hadn't been the case in previous years. It was more like, we have a problem, and we still get stuff like, hey, we have a problem, like we're getting threats online. What do we do? How do we protect? How do we monitor social media? How do we protect our executives? Who should we be protecting? What policies? I mean, we still get a lot of that kind of piecemeal business, but now we're getting more companies looking at, hey, let's just not do this in bits and bytes. Let's look at this comprehensively, have a whole threat management intelligence program, and build like a sustainable structure. So that's the most interesting thing I see right now.
Yeah, Mike, what I've been hearing too on my side is the tariffs have really forced companies to cut back on investments in the U.S. And with that saying, they're just sitting on their money, as they say, in the business world until things start relaxing, is what I've been hearing. And there's been a slowdown. It's almost like a COVID hangover still happening from COVID, because we got slapped really hard. I mean, the globe got hit really hard with that. And I'm talking to a lot of my colleagues out there, and we're still dealing with the after effects of COVID. We're still coming out of that almost recession. We went into deep recession, and now we're coming out of that. And now we got to get back to work. Oh, what does that look like? For time being in the Bay Area, there's hardly anybody going anywhere. Everybody's working remotely. Everybody moved away. And now they have to come back to the office. It's like, oh, shoot, really? Got to go back to the office for productivity. And so now we have this new generation workforce who is, in their 20s, cracking into their careers in the middle of COVID. And I like this work style. And now everybody's forced to show up and produce. And now we have a whole new way of thinking. We have social media stimulation, and we have that aggravations of misinformation. And that's the key why we need to have protective intelligence actively in people's security programs, especially for these enterprise organizations that are massive, running billions of dollars, and they demand profit. Baseline budget. They need to have profit. If they don't get profit, they start asking people that aren't producing. And so now you have the almost anti-enterprise culture in the U.S. going, why are you making profit? Well, that's what business is for. And so can you address that to the younger generation that might be listening to the podcast on what you guys are seeing from your assessments and stuff at Kroll?
Sure. So you touched on a couple different things there. And the first thing was sort of like post-COVID and new people coming to the workforce when they really haven't had to come in before. And then older people, not necessarily old people, but people who had been in the workforce, prior to COVID, having to come back after not have been there so long, and security sort of, and HR having the responsibility of, do our policies meet the moment now? Do people even remember what our policies are? People were coming back and saying, okay, what's the policy on child leave or whatever, parental leave, or on, if there's a tragedy in the family or whatever it might be. It's like, does that suit what the new reality is? And it's gotten, and in a lot of cases, HR couldn't even remember, they've got a lot of policies to deal with. And so they were kind of struggling with that. And it's like, okay, we've got to revisit all this stuff for new generations in the workforce and the new working reality. As far as getting to your second issue, which is you have a younger workforce who is very often very idealistic and mission oriented, and sometimes even activist. You have to, there's some sense that they want to build their own meaningful career around issues and actions that are meaningful to them, right? So in the past, like when I went to law school, people would come in and say, "Oh yeah, I want to be an environmental lawyer," and they'd come out, and the joke was they'd be an environmental lawyer, but they'd be defending the companies that were destroying the environment because that's where the money was, right? Those are the ones making a profit. Now they want to, they want to work for the companies that, and that's great. There are green companies and everything, but even green companies have to make profit, right? So you're at a place where, you've got people questioning the capitalist system, right? It's like, well, that's not going anywhere, right? But there is a place where young people can, find meaning in their work, suit their need for, for things that that align with their ethics, with their purpose in life. And it may be that, they're not at the right place, right? They're still in their journey because not every company is, full throttle ESG or, or sustainability, governance, blah, 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 that you may need a couple bites at the apple to find that place for you. Because that when we still live in a capitalist system, we still have to, it's all about earnings, it's all about revenue. It's about EBITDA, right? So that's not going anywhere but for young professionals, I don't want to dampen their passion for doing meaningful work. And I'm not trying to, and I shouldn't, but they will probably need a few iterations to find a place where their values match the corporate values, and the corporation can make money, right? So it's like nobody's in business unless you're working for a charity, a nonprofit, a foundation, and that may be where they end up going, right? But even there, you say, okay, great, I'm working for this foundation, with, a billionaire is funding it, but the money may not be there if it's relying on public funds or government funds. We saw what happened with the government, when the Trump administration, a lot of things just shut down because it was relying on that source of funding. So it's a tricky area, but the young folks who, are committed to their mission, things are out there. They just have to be persistent, patient, and dogged about it.
Yeah, you brought up a good point. But what I'm seeing too is it's a culture shift in what's expected by the younger generation. And what I'm hearing too is they don't agree with the OG's way of doing business. They just don't agree with it. And I think what they saw was, both of their parents working and they're left alone at home, babysitter, their brother or sister watching them, playing video games. That's what they knew. And now they're kind of confused and almost angry, a sense of anger, and trying to find that their identity and what they should do with life. And that's kind of what I'm hearing out there from many folks, and many of whom listen to the podcast for advice, coaching from afar, mentorship from afar. We don't even know who the folks are that listen to them, but they're reaching out. A lot of them spend a lot of time on Instagram and TikTok because they've been conditioned to swipe left, swipe right, TikTok, entertainment. If you don't catch their attention in 30 seconds, 3 seconds, they move on. And they have, stimulation overload, the dopamine hit, and they just been conditioned through our society, through technology to be the way they are. And so I'm like, well, how do we give them a breakthrough? What olive branch do we extend to them to help them have a breakthrough professionally and personally? And I'm like, how do we do that? How do we pull that off for the next generation? Because I know they get beat up a lot for being, called lazy and no motivation, no drive. And so I know they get a bad rap from the older generation, like our generation, for just not having any internal burning fire to go out there and conquer the world and divide the Red Sea with a stick and do crazy amazing things. They don't understand that meaning or that concept, and they're just like, what does that mean? We just have a different way of thinking.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of interesting things here, and I think that we have to set aside our judgment because our parents said to us, "So you have it easy." Their parents who grew up, whatever, in the Depression said, "You have it easy," right? And in a way, they're right. In a way, they're wrong, because the world only gets more sophisticated and complicated and harder in a way for people. I'm glad I'm not living in the Middle Ages and growing potatoes, whatever, on subsistence, and having to go and be a fight for my lord, and then that person takes everything away, and it's like you're barely holding on. Or living in an age, and in the 1800s, where it seems like glamorous and everything, but everybody's dying of easily containable diseases nowadays, right? They're dying of consumption, they're dying of measles or whatever, typhoid, right? So I'd much rather live in the modern world, but now we're in the hyper-modern world, or getting to the hyper-modern world, and there's so many pressures on these kids. There's so much source of information, competing information. It's information overload, the demands on their time. I was at a meeting at my house of worship yesterday, and they have a teen program, and they're trying to say, okay, how do we engage our teens? Because after a certain age, they kind of tune out, and they're all just, I live in an area where there's a high level of like achievement. So like most kids go to college, and there's so much competition for their time. They're all looking to build up their college, credentials. They're playing sports. They're editor of the newspaper. They're doing all these things. They're doing charity work, and they come home, and it's like, okay, what time do you have for your spiritual or faith community? And that's like being pushed to the side, right? So, and not commenting on that. I mean, that's the way it goes, and some places are better than others, and accommodating kids' lifestyles. But we have to look at the pressure on them and the technology and the conditions that they're experiencing that we never did. We didn't grow up with AI. We didn't grow up with TikTok, and so I don't watch TikTok, but I do look at LinkedIn. I mean, not LinkedIn, but also Facebook Reels. Facebook Reels are like TikTok. I can tell you, I could feel my mind deteriorating. Like I read a book. I put the book down, and I'm scrolling through, Facebook, and I'm getting fed things I already believe, and on divisive issues, whether it be Russia, Ukraine, Iran, Israel, Gaza, the capitalism, democratic socialism or whatever. And I'm pretty middle of the road, right? I consider myself independent, right? I believe in some things that are democratic values, other that are Republican. And I'm not an extremist by any sense. And I watch some of this stuff, and it's putting me in an echo chamber. And I'm thinking, I really have to do something. So not that I would ever hurt anyone over this, but I can see how people whose minds are not formed fully would say, I got to go and stop these people from doing this, right? And so you're dealing with a confluence of issues, and AI creating, bots and stuff, that half the stuff is not even
real,
legitimate, right? It's artificial, right. And some of it is created by foreign adversaries who want to sow discord and destruction and want to undermine the democratic, foundations of our society. So you have to look at these things and say, okay, these are young people coming up in this time. They don't know what's real and what's not real. We need to not be jerks, like overbearing jerks about it, and sort of pass on our wisdom and our judgment and say, you need to or we would advise you to move off the TikTok stuff, use that for entertainment. But you want serious, start reading books, start looking at these podcasts, start, because they don't trust anything now. Sometimes they're like, well, everything, because we had CBS, we had, Dan Rather when we were growing up, right? Like everyone trusted him, right?
Right.
But now
good point.
You could take the most, I can't even tell you what the most respected media is right now. You might say like neutral. You might say the Wall Street Journal or something. But they would say, oh, that's just capitalist, propaganda. The New York Times I grew up with was, because I grew up in New York, was always like the paper of record. Now, it was always left-leaning, but now it's seen as sort of a major left-wing publication. It's like almost like the Fox News is to the right, New York Times is to the left, right? Or even CNN, which was kind of neutral. CNN is kind of pushed over on the MSNBC side of like ultra liberal or whatever. So you now have the best you can get is like center right, center left. I don't think there's many, maybe the Christian Science Monitor or there may be some programs, but everything we now argue over what is fair, objective, or even the truth, right? So I think we need to help the younger generation cope with that and deal with that without coming in ham-handedly and saying, oh, this is right, this is wrong, you should read the Wall Street Journal, but not that. You should watch this station, but not that. You should listen to this podcast, but not that. I think we could give them a sort of like a map and say, here is the universe of information sources. And here's an approach to determining which ones have value. We're not saying that Fox News is always good or MSNBC is always bad or vice versa, but here's how you kind of evaluate the quality. And here's how to think critically about these sources of information. Never accept any of this without, analysis or out challenging it, right? Look for outside sources. That's what I was trained to do, but as a kid, but also I had to go to the library for information. We didn't have the internet, right?
Yeah, so it didn't exist back then.
Right.
So now, back then.
Exactly. So now you can get everything on your fingertips, everything you want, and AI knows what you want. The algorithms in TikTok and Facebook know what you want. You've got to be an objective, reasonable thinking person. You have to fight all these powers. And that's not even talking, like the effect of peer pressure, which is enormous. So I'll tell you that when my kids were young, they knew I was in security and that I was, pro-police, and they were embarrassed by it. I remember hearing my daughter in high school say, oh my God, my dad likes the police. It's so embarrassing, because they learned in school or in the environment. We were in, a very kind of open-minded area, let's say. And they were learned like, oh, the system of the police, the systematic racism, brutality, all those bad things. And in my area, we're kind of overrepresented by minorities. So they were doing like Black Lives Matters marches and stuff, which is fine. And they were saying, these police, and I said to my kids, look at the police around you. It's like there's white, black, Hispanic, Asian. This is like the ideal police force. It represents the community perfectly. And they said, oh no, it's not the people, it's the system. I said, okay, explain to me the system. It's like, and they're fed these kinds of things. And I said, so who are you going to call if you're being mugged? Will you call the police? He said, no, I'll call you. I said, that's nice and all, but first of all, I may not be equipped. Secondly, I may not be available. Just a couple years later, when they got out of the TikTok kind of thing, it's less the TikTok than the peer pressure, I asked them the same questions and they mellowed out. and part of his maturity. Like, yeah, now we see the role of police and security. They're still not necessarily like, they're not going out for careers in policing, but the maturity. And I said to them also, you could be against the police and think, they're corrupt. And as long as you go through a process, and a defensible intellectual process of analyzing the information before you and not just listening to people on TikTok. Because my daughter said to me, I was giving her, why law enforcement is good and security, blah, blah, blah. And she said, oh, you'd get destroyed on TikTok. I said, of course I'd get destroyed because I'd be shouted down, right? Not because of the quality of the argument, but because of the volume and the number of people. So that's the kind of thing where we have to give people the tools to evaluate the information, the environment they're in, and not be saying, tisk, tisk, I knew better. That never worked with my parents saying, oh, I knew better because I had to, walk up 5 miles to school uphill in the snow both ways. That doesn't work with anyone, so
yeah, right.
We have to have more, authentic conversations and relationships with the generation.